All right, let's get started. Welcome in, everyone. Today we have an extra special show for you with a truly unique guest, cyber mentalist Gary Chan. On the agenda today, we are looking at what is cyber mentalism. We will go through Gary's mentalism routine, which I and a select group of team members from Hawkshunt had the privilege of seeing. And we will look at the power of entertainment to drive security engagement. My name is Elliot Baker. I am the Director of Content at Hawkshunt. And joining me today is Gary Chan, security mentalist and intellectual who uses entertainment to drive security initiatives, gain organizational buy-in up through the board level, and teach audiences security concepts in a manner that keeps them wanting more. As a mentalist, he has won awards and been featured at the Chicago Magic Lounge. As a security specialist, he has held different positions, including currently being the Chief Information Security Officer for SSM Health, an $11 billion healthcare system. He served as president of the FBI St. Louis Citizens Academy Alumni Association and technology officer of the Greater St. Louis Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. He holds 4 security certifications and a degree in electrical engineering at computer science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Great to have you here today, Gary.
A pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Elliot.
So before we get started, I need to look back a little bit about me and the Hawkshunt team met Gary when he was delivering a keynote presentation at the CSO 50 Awards in Fort McDowell, Arizona last October. So it blew us away. And it blew away an auditorium of hundreds of the world's most accomplished CISOs. And it wasn't just the magic show aspects of Gary's presentation, although there were some serious David Blaine, Chris Angel vibes to it. It was how well mentalism tapped into the psychology of social engineering. So without further ado, Gary, you're a security mentalist. Can you share how your blend of mentalism and cybersecurity came about and what it means for people who aren't familiar with the concept?
Sure. Mentalism is about understanding human psychology in order to influence people without them even knowing it. And it's often used for entertainment, especially when you say the word mentalism. And so I've been practicing mentalism for more than security, actually, for like 25 years. One of the FBI had actually asked me if I could do like a show for a group, but they had one caveat. They said, "Could it be for security people?" And so I said, "Well, what is mentalism for security people?" And they said, "Well, we don't know. We were hoping you could tell us." And so I said, no, because I don't know what that is, and I didn't want to look like a fool. So anyway, life goes on, and then COVID happens. At that point, nobody was hiring anybody for entertainment or anything like that, right? We're all locked in, and I thought, how could I reimagine this whole mentalism thing that I do? And I was thinking, what can I create that's better than anybody else's, for a particular niche. So I figured, well, what do I know? I know security and I know mentalism. And I thought about what the FBI had asked me before. And then so I created a routine. I created a interrogation routine. This is how an FBI agent would interrogate a suspect. And this is how a mentalist would interrogate a suspect, all for entertainment. And so I performed it for them, and they said that they really enjoyed it. They thought it was a lot of fun. And they also thought that the content was really good, educational. So that's how it was born. And so since that point, I've sort of expanded it, grown it, turned it into like 30 different modules of things. I just call them modules about different forms of social engineering and things that you can do with mentalism and security. And then that has evolved into security awareness training because people are like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. You're learning something and it's entertaining. And then, people then ask me to perform these keynotes, as one that you saw, to talk about different security concepts, but using mentalism as entertainment. So that's how it sort of evolved over time.
It's amazing how things can evolve like that. And I'll tell the audience there's only one way to really understand what we're talking about here, and that's through a demonstration. So I believe that, Gary, you have a demonstration prepared for us. So let's get into it.
Awesome. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to play a little memory game. And so what we've got here is I've got this routine called the disappearing card. If you can just memorize one of the 6 cards that I'm about to show you. You should have a card in mind. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to take those 6 cards and I'm going to remove 1 card, as you can see. That leaves us with 5 cards. And I'm going to tell you that I've actually just taken away the card that you're thinking of. It's all in your mind. I'm going to show you the 5 cards. And your card should no longer be there. All right. So hopefully that was a bit of fun for you, but you also get the point, right? So, you can influence people, so to speak, or trick them, even through the computer camera, something like that.
My mind is a little bit blown right now. And I'll tell the audience that this is just a tiny taste of Gary's entire keynote presentation that he delivers to companies and organizations all across the world. If you do want to book Gary for an event, then I think that you would be very happy with what you see there. It's really something else. So I was going to ask you, how can techniques from stage magic or mentalism make security awareness training more engaging and help shift the broader culture?
Sure. Well, the whole point of this is you want people to want it, right? Like, how many of you have seen security awareness training that just gets put in the black background, because people are just trying to get through the annual training? That's not the point. Like, if they put it out in the background, they're not really learning a whole lot. All they're doing is getting credit, so to speak, because the video is playing. So when I make it entertainment, people actually want to watch. And the outcome of that is that people will actually share it with their friends and family, which I know sounds pretty crazy, but I honestly have people who will show it to their friends and family, and they'll also watch the training material multiple times by their own volition, right? So you want people to want it. That's the whole point. And if you can incorporate that into your work, right? So this is not about me doing a show. This is about me sharing like the concept of incorporating entertainment into your presentations so that people want it. And there are ways to do that in an engaging fashion without mentalism. You can tell very good stories to your board. You could help your CISO put together material that people find fascinating, right? So one of the things that my team did at SSM Health is we put together a LMS, learning management system training class that I think is like 20 or 30 minutes or something like that. That really was sort of a quote unquote magic show. And what we would do is we would show the effect being, like, hey, a hacker had just stolen $10 million from the company. How did this happen? Right? And then we kind of walked them through the quote unquote the magic behind the scenes. So everything was magic themed, but it really was sort of like a mystery novel. And so you are shown what the mystery is, and then we kind of walk you along to try to solve it like a detective. And people really liked it. I got a lot of unsolicited feedback of, wow, Gary, like, this is fantastic. And we actually got Christmas cards from employees telling us how much they liked it. And like, we don't normally get Christmas cards. It's like not a thing. It's weird. But they actually enjoyed watching it. They thought that it was beneficial because they also learned something. I think that's the key. So the idea is you can create things even without actually knowing magic or mentalism or anything like that, that people want. And if you can do that, then people are going to bring you to the table and you're going to achieve your goals a lot better.
I absolutely agree. And that's really a great couple of case study examples there for what you can do to get people to want it and the effect that can have. I mean, getting a Christmas card as opposed to hate mail is really kind of a nice thing when you're in charge of a security awareness program, I'm sure.
It is.
There are a couple different things in my notes here that I thought we could look over, but maybe do you have kind of a general, did you ever have a general aha moment when the FBI came to you and asked you to give your presentation, for instance, when you kind of saw, oh, in this very overarching way, I actually can see how social engineering is actually quite like mentalism because of X, Y, or Z?
I thought that I wish that I were that astute to have come up with that instantaneously. This was an evolution over years of time. But now, having looked back at it, I can tell you exactly the answer in like one sentence. Um, so, social engineering, taking advantage of people for bad reasons. Mentalism, you're taking advantage of people and the way that they think, but for entertainment. So it's for good reasons. So it's exactly the same types of things that you're doing and so on and so forth, but except that I'm not actually stealing your money. I'm not actually taking your things. I'm not doing things that you wouldn't actually want. You actually want it, but it's for entertainment reasons. So I'm not stealing from you or anything like that. So they're really kind of the same thing. Social engineering for bad reasons, mentalism for positive reasons. But I think because the jump is so small and people can see it, oh my gosh, if they took advantage of me on stage for fun and everybody had a good laugh, what if this were not actually, then they get it, right? And that's the difference.
I think that's where a lot of the audience really had that aha moment. At least I did. And that was, I don't know, stop me if you don't want me to give away any part of your routine. But when Ryan Boulay, the CISO from AES at the time, went on stage to participate in the phone call, there was the phone call routine where you called a stranger. You solicited phone numbers from the audience. You showed on a screen that these were numbers solicited from the audience. So it was clearly a stranger in the middle of who knows where. And then you got that person to do something. You got that person to give you information over the phone. And it was just really kind of like an, oh my gosh moment where this is a dangerous man. Like if you were to actually apply this for a black hat purpose, it would be highly effective because the person on the phone was confused, but also was just went along with it.
That's right. And that's the whole point. You can see the quick leap. And of course, I share during the show about all the different techniques that I would use during the call. Of course, I don't know which exact ones I'm going to use until the person picks up. But the idea is these techniques work. And so, yeah, I mean, you can use it for all sorts of nefarious reasons. And unfortunately, that's what these scam centers and all these other things, they do. They use these techniques, but for all bad reasons.
Absolutely. Let's move on to now those actual underpinnings, psychological underpinnings here. So the sleight of hand in cyber. Could you describe how psychological sleight of hand, like reading body language or using emotional cues, can both empower defenders and guide malicious attackers? And how do we harness that power ethically for security initiatives?
Sure. So I think there's a whole lot to unpack there, right? So let's talk about a little bit more on the let's say on the internal side, since I think a lot of your audience might be like InfoSec team members that are within an organization and wanting to say grow their career and things like that, right? So understanding the psychology is just super important, and you can apply this to, for example, your boss or your boss's boss, right? So this is about telling really good stories and helping them understand what it is that actually happened. And one of the things that I really like to explain, which will sort of bridge, I think, between what the bad guy does and how you use that information internally in order to get more support, is like when we talk about vulnerabilities, right? So in the traditional world of TVM, threat and vulnerability management, I might for example, give a report of the number of vulnerabilities over to the CIO or the CEO or the whatever. Well, I mean, they look at that and they see a number. I don't think they really understand what it means. They might understand the concepts, right? At a very high level, but like, what does that really mean for my business? Like, I don't know. So turn that into a story. So let's say that, with the Microsoft Exchange a couple of years ago, right, you could use these vulnerabilities as a bad guy, and you can take over somebody's Microsoft Exchange server. That's a pretty big deal. Well, what a lot of organizations would do would be they would just sort of patch it, right? And which is the right answer. And then they would say, hey, I patched against this vulnerability. Well, there's no real psychological impact there. That's just a fact. Like if you just told me, Gary, I patched this thing against this vulnerability, I don't really have that much of a feeling. And then if you go a little bit further and say this vulnerability would have, is for Microsoft Exchange. Okay, well, that's a technical piece. That's another fact I really don't have any feeling. The whole point is to cause a feeling. So here's what I would do, or here's what I actually did. I said, okay, well, I forget the exact time, so I'm just going to make up some times. At 7 a.m., this vulnerability was published. By noon, our team had patched it. And at 3 p.m., we could see on the firewall that a hacker had attempted exploitation of this. So had we been 3 hours later, they would have exploited it. Now, what does that mean? That means that if this team weren't here, or if we had gone out to lunch, that all of the emails in this organization would have been compromised. Someone would have been able to read your emails, Mr. or Miss CEO. I mean, that gets people's attention, right? And you're telling the story of what the hacker did, but you're doing it in a way to get people really invested in it. It's a little bit, you're turning it into a movie, basically. So that's how you can use psychology to help drive your initiatives. It's all about storytelling.
I love that. That's a great example of how to apply storytelling towards actually communicating the value of what it is that you're doing. You bring up the stakes, you bring up the bad guys, the good guys, the struggle, the tension there, and you actually make it relevant. You make it relevant on a human level, on a business level. That's a really great way to express that. Yeah, thank you for that. Moving on to impact on career and security budget. So probably building on that, like the power of storytelling, you talked about the benefits of mastering psychology, like getting promotions, budget increases, or stronger policy enforcement. Can you outline how a savvy security professional might apply these interpersonal skills day to day?
Sure. Well, I think you just at a basic level, right? It's just figuring out who's going to be on your side. So part of what I do on the show, and this is all just analogy, is, I bring on people on stage that are more likely to kind of go through the process with me, right? You're not going to pick a guy who's crossed his arm and is, like got a frown on his face watching the show. Not that there really are people like that, but let's say that there were. You just don't pick those people. So the same idea holds in real life if you're talking about trying to get your security budget. You need to be able to read people. And I don't necessarily mean like all of the body language and all these other stuff. They help a lot. But I think we all have a sense of who are the people who are going to be on our side, right? And so you need to form a coalition, so to speak. It doesn't have to be a formal one, but figure out who are the people that are going to be helping you and supporting you. And that's where some of this psychology and all these things, come up. Then you can say, hey, Gary, I can't really tell, or maybe, whatever, right? So, okay, so just start using some metrics, right? Like how many times do they reach out to you to talk about information security versus you having to reach out to them, right? Are they always receptive to the first time that you set up a meeting, or do they always push you out by a couple of weeks? Whenever they ask you for your opinion, do they just ask you for an opinion, then continue talking? Right? It's a question, but not really a question. Or do they ask you a question and wait and then ask more thoughtful questions, right? These are just very, they're very specific, but they're just really subtle tips and on how you know whether or not they're even going to be on your side, right? Then you can kind of use that, right? These people are going to be helping you. You can ask them for their thoughts, for their opinions, be inquisitive, be curious. You'll understand how they see the world, right? And the more information you have, the better. So while I'm not asking you to go out to like grab a whole bunch of people's data, I would just also tell you that this data is almost always, available, especially in large organizations. If I know that the networking team has $10 million, I'm probably not going to ask for $10 million because the networking team is probably going to always have a bigger budget than me, depending upon how the org structures are laid out. I'm just assuming that they own the firewalls and all the other stuff, right? So the more information you have, the better it can be. And you can use all of these statistics to understand, for example, security, depending upon which metric you use, it's oftentimes between like 4% and like 15% of the overall IT bucket, right? So you can talk with people, understand what those budgets are. You can talk with your finance team. You can look it up in the system. A lot of large organizations have reports, financial reports that are open to everyone. And you can just see kind of what that stuff is. And you can think about it from the CIO's perspective or whoever it is that you report to say, well, I've got all these different teams, and then I've got, John Smith, head of the security team, and he's asking for 5% or, whatever, right? So you've got a whole ton of information with you, and you can say, well, if I were that person, what would cause me to want to give him more money. Let's say that you're at 2%. Well, that's an easy argument. You can say there's no other company that has it less than 5%, right? Like you need more of a budget. If you're already at 13%, then maybe your story is, hey, you know what? You like being the forefront of technology and innovation. Why don't you go champion by telling everybody how great of a security program it is? And then psychologically, they own that now. So when you go and ask for more budget, you're saying, hey, you've got a great program. Don't you want to keep it going? That's going to be a lot more effective than saying, give me more money. I've got 13% already and give me more, right? So it's really thinking about it from the other person's perspective, which is what mentalism is all about. Grabbing as much data as you can and then formulating stories that help move you in the direction that you're trying to move.
Well, speaking of grabbing all the data you can and moving people in the direction that you would like to move them, that was a fantastic mentalism white hat example of that. Now, looking at the social engineering version of that, where they use emotions, urgency, and open source intelligence, how do you recommend that practitioners actually stay vigilant against these tactics while also using similar techniques to build trust and awareness? As you have been discussing how to use those kind of tactics and techniques for white hat purposes.
Sure. And I think that there's a whole lot to break down in this question as well. So, for example, we need to first off understand how other people impact us. Right. So I'll give you this sort of short example from a mentalism perspective, but then I'll bring it back to kind of what it means for us. So there's this mentalist who was teaching what he calls like the white sand on the beach routine. So the idea is he will tell the volunteer, hey, think of this random thing, and then think of this random thing, and then now tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. And the idea is they would always think of white sand on a beach. That's just what they would do. And then someone in the class was like, hey, you taught us this, but it doesn't work for me. And he's like, okay, well, what happens? It's like, well, every time that I do this, they think of a pebble in a stream. And he goes, okay. And he's like, well, they're not thinking of a white sand on the beach. And he goes, well, yeah, of course not. I mean, you're different. You're a different person. So just call it the pebble in a stream trick. So that's the whole point. Everybody interacts differently with people, and people will therefore respond differently to that person. And I think the hardest part about mentalism is recognizing that you're not looking for the trick. You're looking for the best process based on how it is that you talk. Right. So I tend to talk a little bit faster a lot of times than, say, the average person. And I need to take that into account. That means people are going to feel more pressured to respond to me than the average person, because that's what happens whenever you talk faster. For mentalism routine, that actually helps a bit because you want people to be thinking more quickly. The faster they go, the more likely it is that they'll think about what you want. But you have to incorporate that deliberately into what it is that you're doing. And so you have to be able to look at yourself and say, how do I interact with people? And what am I doing to cause other people to behave in the way that they do? Because only after you understand what it is that you are doing can you actually really think about the other person and how you can sort of influence them. At a very basic example that I think most people don't do is measure the pause. So what do I mean by that? So if I said, hey, Elliot, how was your weekend? By the way, mine was great. Right? Like, I clearly wouldn't care. Like, I don't care about your weekend, right? Like, because I didn't actually pause. But if I said, hey, Elliot, hey, man, how was your weekend?
It was great. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. And then if I ask a follow-up question on your weekend, then I probably care. Like, these are all probabilities, right? So that's the idea is like, what are you actually truly thinking? If you pause after asking a question, you actually care about what that person is thinking. And so if I think that I'm very open to different ideas, but I never actually pause, then maybe I should think about that and then think about why people interact with me the way that they do. Maybe they don't care about my opinion because I never pause for them because I don't care about their opinion. So why should they care about my opinion? So the idea is to really think about how it is that you are influencing and affecting other people first, because then once you understand that, then you can actually learn to change your own behavior and do that in a very genuine way, right? Like if I just literally said after every time I ask a question, if I just told myself just pause, right? Like for the first maybe half a year or something, maybe that's just a trick that I'm doing. But over time, you actually turn into that person and you actually start caring because you're starting to actually listen, right? Because you actually did pause. So you can say there's a tail wagging the dog sometimes, but the point is understand yourself. And then once you understand yourself, then you can change these small behaviors for yourself, which then allow you to influence other people much more effectively. If you look at this as a trick, which is how most people do it and why they're completely unsuccessful, then it never becomes genuine and they'll never actually be able to do it. So that's the biggest thing is understand yourself, think about these little things that you are doing to influence other people, and then you can change it once you understand it.
These are fantastic communication principles also. I wasn't expecting us to go into this level of the psychology of communication, but you've really gone deep here. And it makes total sense of why, of course, I mean, mentalism and social engineering, you are using very core communication principles to influence people. And that's basically the art of communication, whether you're reading the old Dale Carnegie books or the other ones, 7 Habits of Highly Influential People, Highly Effective People, or How to Influence People and Win Friends, or Win Friends and Influence People. My brain's a little scrambled right now, but
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, it all comes back to communication tactics. I think that's really important. Just a real sidebar, which is really interesting too, is that at CSO 50, I actually had a long conversation with a CISO from a very large global company, and this is what he was really, I wouldn't say struggling with, but was really focused on, was how he could develop his own personal communication abilities better, and how he could get his security awareness team to just get some kind of like small little habits like what you're talking about. And I love the pauses example. That's so true. And you know who are really good at using pauses are actors. Actors are taught very early on that you can have a very powerful dramatic pause in order to kind of dial up or dial down the impact of a statement. So I absolutely love that example of how to use that kind of stuff. But what's interesting though, and I'll put this about with social engineers who I've interacted with before, I picked up the call on cold calls before where I knew it was a scam. My phone says scam alert. I was kind of curious who I'm going to talk to. And it's very much putting me, it's just like almost bullying on the phone where they just put you on your heels immediately. And there's an element of that. You weren't bullying this person, but you kind of were just kind of talking over a little bit, getting this person a little bit off their footing a little bit to influence the conversation in a way where they did what you wanted them to do, which wasn't anything nefarious, but it was, proving a point. And again, to social engineering, how would you recommend people recognize a social engineering, a phishing call, a voice call that is done by a social engineer?
Well, I think the most straightforward, I think that most people know is, hey, if you don't know the person, just be a little more skeptical. So I think a lot of times it's just that simple. If it gets too complicated, people just aren't going to do it. So I would just say if you don't know the person, just be extra cautious about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Slow down. If they're asking for stuff from you that you wouldn't normally give them, just don't give it to them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this thing about vishing because you brought it up a couple of times, and I think your audience would find this super interesting. One of the things that I do during my show is I talk about the different techniques that people will use. And my absolute favorite one is talking about emotions, right? So I'm taking advantage of people's emotions. That's the whole point of this routine, and that's exactly what a social engineer will do. There are a ton of different ones, and if you ever go through training for interrogations and things like that, they'll teach you like 14 different emotions you can push people towards. And the one that I like to use, which is not one of the official ones, but I like it because it's very easy for people to understand, is embarrassment, right? So think about this: if you've got if you have your I'll just say your intellectual capacity. Let's just for lack of a better word, you if you are using say to if you are you can let's say that you have 10 units of intellectual capacity, so everything that you do takes up between 0 units and 10 units, so keep it simple. And of course these units are completely made up. Let's say that whenever you have emotions, right, when you're really angry, how clearly do you think, Elliot? Not very well, right?
Not
No,
well.
just
Don't think well when I'm angry.
you don't think well when you're angry. That's because your emotions subtract from your intellectual capacity. So if you have 10 units, but then you're angry, well, maybe you only have 2 units of intellectual capacity left, which means you can only do some things kind of well, right? So different people will react differently. If they have something that's like really will take up 10 units of capacity, well, maybe they just sort of shut down. Other people will forge forwards, but they'll just do it all really wrong, right? But what I will say is that let's say that the thing that you're trying to do is just like right around the 2, but let's say it's like a 3. Most people will still try to do it, but they'll just do it wrong. So what you want to do is you want to figure out whatever it is that you're trying to get them to do, how much intellectual capacity that's going to be. And then you want to increase their emotional level to a state to where they're just below what their intellectual capacity will be after they have that emotion. And that's when you got them. And that's exactly what these bad guys are going to try to do. They're going to ramp up your emotional state. So whether it's with pressure, because you're going to lose your job, you're going to go to jail, whatever it is, and then get you to do what they want you to do. And they're not going to want to raise it too much, right? Because then you just might shut off, or at least the good ones won't. Some of them might raise it, but then they'll fail. And what I found is at least for fun routines and things like that, the best is embarrassment, because nobody likes to be embarrassed. You don't feel good about it, but it's also not so detrimental that you're going to just shut off, right? So if you get someone to the point of too much, it's way above embarrassment, they might shut off. And if it's too far below it, then they're not going to really, they're going to be thinking clearly, right? So one of the techniques that I do on on phishing calls or whatever is I will try to embarrass them a little bit, make them feel like they should have known an answer to something that they don't know the answer to, or something like that. It just causes a little bit of discomfort, even though there's no reason for them to feel that way. If you just make them feel that way, then they're more likely to do what you want them to do. So I'm not suggesting you do this to your boss, but the idea is, again, is understanding human psychology, because that really helps you understand how others might take advantage of you. So even if you don't use it to apply it to others, if you start feeling that embarrassment or feeling the emotional state, maybe you just want to slow down a little bit, think it through, and sort of give that's another use of the pause, is you can, that might help you get rid of that emotional state and then be able to think more clearly.
That was really well put. I love the way that you put that. It's almost like having one of those like battery icons. And if you like really hammer someone with rage or embarrassment, their little energy reserves for mental energy is going to just go down and down and down until they basically are just going to say, I'll get out of the situation, I'll click whatever you need. That's really well put. And very interesting that embarrassment winds up being the most, or one of the most useful emotional levers to pull there to get someone to do an action. Everyone has their kind of profile of information processing and storage and emotional range when they're confronted with these kind of situations. And one of the things that I've seen with what HawksHunt does is HawksHunt presents people with phishing simulations, and sometimes, depending on the learning profile, as the algorithm and the AI analyzes it, and as the person opts into it, it can get a little bit spicier and spicier and spicier to the point where some of them can be like pretty intense. And so the trick with, like, I think with security awareness training sometimes and phishing training is that you do want to get people to say, oh, like, oh, wow, that really kind of, that I felt something from that. I got kind of a jolt in some way, whether it's a fear or whatever else. But if you have someone disheveled and pulling their hair out, then that might have gone a little bit too far to get a lesson across, perhaps.
That's right. That's right. That's why it's super important to tailor it as best as you can. If your audience is mostly a particular type, then you want to tailor it to just a little bit more than what that person knows, so that they have that aha moment, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are rounding into the end of our time together here. This conversation has gone incredibly fast. I can't believe we're already at this point. Now, if you have time, then maybe we could go through just sort of a summary of what we talked about today, and just the fact that you do speak and work with companies all around about how to give their security awareness programs a boost. Do you have any summarizing words of wisdom, bringing it all together for the audience today who want to apply today's principles?
Yeah, engage your audience. That's literally it. Engage your audience, and you can do that by telling great stories. Hopefully, I've given you a ton of examples on this call. If you want more examples, drop me an email, and I'm sure that HawksHunt will have my contact information there, and I'll share with you some more ideas. But you can use it for all sorts of things. Get people engaged. That's the key. That's what I do. That's what I think will help you if you're just wanting to make sure that your employees are learning what you want them to learn.
Fantastic. Well, Gary, it's a pleasure seeing you again. I hope our paths cross again. Hopefully you don't leave me in some kind of a emotional wreck after the next time you do some kind of a mentalism routine with me. But I really appreciate you coming by today, and the audience really appreciates it too.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
As Chief Information Security Officer, I get paid to protect my company against cyber attacks. Okay, it's actually pretty cool. But it's getting harder, which is less cool. And those automated awareness programs, it's not helpful. They send like 4 generic phishing emails that most employees ignore.
Oh, hello there.
And when somebody actually clicks, they get forced into embarrassing training programs that feel more like a punishment. Meanwhile, cyber criminals are getting more sophisticated with personalized attacks that pick off my employees like sitting ducks.
Not again.
Especially Bob. So, I tried HawksHunt. HawksHunt goes beyond cybersecurity awareness and actually changes behavior, rewarding good clicks and coaching away the bad. HawksHunt's adaptive learning model trains each employee based on their role, background, and skill level, so simulations feel like real-world attacks. If they fail a simulation, they get a quick training that's actually sort of fun. And when they spot an attack, they get positive reinforcement that locks in the behavior change. Whenever an employee suspects an email might be a scam, HawksHunt will tell them instantly, providing a dopamine rush that gets your people to click, learn, and protect your company. Here's the magic part. HawksHunt's adaptive model gets better with every threat reported across the HawksHunt network, creating a network effect, with millions of people working together to build a human threat detection engine that's more powerful than any platform or process could ever be. Which means these days, the possibilities are endless.